In a silent house, a young woman tries to protect her baby from the fury of the man who once promised her love. What begins with shouting turns into brutal violence until the door opens and everything changes. In that moment, the truth that was once ignored finally begins to have a voice. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. The afternoon light streamed through the apartment window in Manchester, casting soft shadows on the white living room walls. Felicity adjusted the baby in her arms, feeling Michael's comforting weight against her chest. The little one was only 3 months old, and every movement still surprised her with a mix of love and responsibility she had never experienced before. Her rounded belly, already 5 months into her second pregnancy, made every gesture a little more careful, a little slower. It was Saturday night, and the silence of the house contrasted with the usual weekend buzz, back when she still went out with friends, when she still laughed without restraint, when she still felt in control of her own life. Now everything seemed different. The 2-bedroom apartment in the Willow Creek neighborhood, which once seemed like the beginning of a new and promising life, had transformed into something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't exactly a prison, but it was no longer a home in the sense she knew. Michael began to whimper, a low sound that would soon turn into a cry if she didn't act fast. Felicity started to rock him gently, humming a melody her mother used to sing to her when she was little. Memories of her childhood in Bristol, in her family home, seemed to belong to another person now. A version of herself who still believed that love was enough, who trusted promises, who didn't measure every word before uttering it. The sound of the key turning in the lock made her tense up immediately. Raphael was coming home from work, or at least that's what he had said that morning, although lately she had stopped asking questions about where he went or who he was with. The answers always came loaded with irritation, with a tone that suggested she was being invasive, controlling, exaggerated. Raphael entered, closing the door with more force than necessary. Felicity recognized that sound. It was the prelude to something, a warning she had learned to decipher in recent weeks. He didn't greet her, just threw his backpack on the sofa and went straight to the kitchen. She heard the refrigerator open, the sound of a beer can popping open, his heavy sigh. Michael's crying intensified as if he sensed the change in energy in the room. Felicity continued rocking, trying to calm him, but her heart was beating faster now. Raphael returned to the living room, can in hand, and looked at her with an expression that mixed tiredness with something darker. "This baby won't stop crying," he said, in a tone that wasn't exactly a question, but an accusation. "He's hungry," Felicity replied, keeping her voice calm, controlled. "I'll prepare his bottle now." Raphael took a long gulp of beer, his eyes still on her. "You haven't done anything today but sit there holding him, have you? The house is a mess." Felicity looked around. The living room was organized, as always. There was only a teacup on the coffee table and a baby cloth on the sofa. But she knew it was pointless to point that out. Lately, anything could be a mess, anything could be a reason for criticism. She had learned that objective reality mattered less than his mood. "Sorry," she murmured, getting up carefully, protecting Michael. "I'll tidy up." Raphael rolled his eyes and went back to the kitchen. Felicity went to the nursery, where she kept Michael's things organized. As she prepared the bottle, her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't fear exactly, or at least not a fear she could name. It was something more akin to a constant tension, a vigilance that never turned off, a feeling of always measuring her steps, her words, her gestures. She remembered how different everything was a few months ago. Raphael had been attentive during the first pregnancy, or at least he seemed to be. He went to doctor's appointments, held her hand, made plans for the future, but something changed after Michael was born. At first she thought it was just the stress of fatherhood, the exhaustion of sleepless nights, the adjustment to the new routine. Everyone said it was normal, that the first few months were difficult. But little by little, she realized it wasn't just that. The criticisms started subtly, disguised as concern. "Don't you think you're spoiling the baby too much? Are you eating properly? You're too sensitive lately." And then came the suggestions about her clothes, her friends, her schedule. Raphael began to question every call she received. every message on her phone, every commitment outside the house. When she discovered the second pregnancy, she thought things would improve. She thought he would be happy, that they would go back to how they were before. But his reaction was strange, distant. He said he was happy, but his eyes said otherwise. And since then, the atmosphere at home had grown even heavier. Felicity returned to the living room with the bottle. Raphael was sitting on the sofa, fiddling with his phone, his expression closed off. She sat in the armchair, beginning to feed Michael. The baby sucked eagerly and she felt a pang of relief. At least, that she could still do. At least in that she still had control. "Aren't you going to eat?" Raphael asked without looking up from his phone. "I started preparing something earlier, but Michael started crying," she replied carefully. "I can make something now if you want." "Forget it. I'll order something." He continued on his phone, and Felicity took advantage of the silence to observe him. Raphael was 32, handsome in a way that always drew attention, with dark hair and piercing eyes. He worked as a civil engineer, and when they met 3 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue, she had been enchanted by his confidence, by how sure he seemed of everything, by the way he took control of situations. In the beginning, this made her feel secure. Now, it made her feel small. Michael finished feeding and began to close his eyes. Felicity got up carefully, going to the nursery to put him in his crib. She stroked his little head, observing her son's peaceful face. In these moments, when she looked at Michael, something inside her still believed that everything would work out, that this phase would pass, that Raphael would go back to being who he was, or who she thought he was. When she returned to the living room, Raphael was still on the sofa but had opened another can of beer. The television was on, showing some football game, but he didn't seem to be really watching. Felicity hesitated before speaking. "Honey, I forgot to tell you. My dad called today. He and Henry are coming over tomorrow. They wanted to see Michael." Raphael turned to her with an expression that made her instinctively take a step back. "You made plans without asking me? They just said they were passing by. It's not a set plan, just a quick visit. I work all week, Felicity. The weekend is the only time I have to rest, and you fill the house with people without even consulting me." "It's my dad and my brother," she said, feeling frustration rise in her throat, but striving to remain calm. "They haven't seen Michael in weeks. And I can go to hell, right? What I want doesn't matter." "That's not it. I just thought you'd like it too. You always liked Henry." Raphael was silent for a moment, taking another sip of beer. Then he stood up, abruptly, walking towards the bedroom. Felicity stood still in the living room, her heart aching, not knowing whether she should follow him or leave him alone. The night promised to be long, and she felt for the first time very clearly that something was about to change irreversibly. 2 weeks earlier, the same living room of the apartment in Manchester was bathed in the golden light of a Sunday morning. Felicity was in the kitchen making coffee when Raphael appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and kissing her neck. She smiled, relaxing into his embrace, feeling the warmth of his body against hers. "Good morning, love," he said with that soft voice that always disarmed her. "What are you making?" "Breakfast. I thought I'd make those cheese scones you love. You're perfect, you know that?" Felicity turned in his arms, meeting his eyes. In that moment, everything felt right. Raphael smiled, genuinely, and she allowed herself to believe that the past few weeks of tension had been just a passing phase, a natural adjustment to the new family dynamic. Michael slept peacefully in his crib in the nursery, and her belly wasn't yet so big as to hinder her movements. It was one of those rare moments of peace she had learned to value, small windows of normalcy amidst something she still couldn't clearly define. Later that morning, while Raphael watched television, Felicity received a call from her best friend, Julia. They had known each other since university, studying education, and Julia was one of the few people Felicity still kept in regular contact with, although in recent months, even those conversations had become less frequent. "Fel, it's been ages since we last saw each other," Julia said on the other end of the line, her voice cheerful. "How about we meet up next week? We could have lunch at that restaurant you love in Spinningfields." Felicity hesitated, her eyes automatically going to Raphael in the living room. He seemed focused on the game, but she knew he was listening. Lately, any suggestion of meeting with friends was met with subtle comments about responsibilities, about the baby needing her, about her not taking care of herself enough. "Let me see how my week looks," Felicity replied, keeping her voice low. "I'll confirm later, okay?" After the call, Raphael looked up from the television. "Julia trying to drag you out again?" "It's not dragging, Raphael, it's just lunch." He sighed as if he were being very patient with something obvious that she couldn't see. "Honey, I just think you should focus more on yourself now. You're pregnant, with a small baby. Is it really the best time to be going out?" It was always like this. Never a direct prohibition, never a clear no. Just suggestions, concerns disguised as care, small criticisms wrapped in love. And she, wanting to believe that he genuinely cared, ended up giving in, cancelling plans, drifting away from the people she loved. The next day, Monday, Felicity had a prenatal appointment. Raphael had said he couldn't accompany her because he had an important meeting at work. She went alone, taking the bus to the clinic in the city centre. While waiting to be called, she checked her phone and saw several messages from Raphael. "Did you get there safely? Is everything all right? What time will you be back?" She replied patiently to each one, knowing that if she took too long to respond, he would get irritated, worried, or that strange mix of the two that she no longer knew how to distinguish. During the appointment, the doctor, Dr. Patricia, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, asked how she was feeling. "Everything's fine," Felicity replied automatically. "And at home? Is your partner helping you?" Felicity hesitated. The question was simple, but something about it touched a sensitive nerve. "Yes, he helps when he can." Dr. Patricia observed her for a moment, as if wanting to say something more, but merely nodded and continued the examination. Afterward, as Felicity dressed, the doctor commented, "You know you can talk about anything here, right? If you have any concerns, anything that isn't right." Felicity thanked her, but said nothing. How could she explain something she didn't even fully understand herself? How could she put into words the feeling of always being on a tightrope, always measuring her steps, always trying not to awaken Raphael's irritation? That night, when he came home from work, he was in a good mood. He brought flowers, a bouquet of yellow roses that made Felicity's heart clench with emotion and confusion. This was the Raphael she had known, the man who could be sweet and attentive, who made her feel special. "Sorry if I've been a bit rough lately," he said, hugging her. "Work's been really demanding and I get worried about you and Michael." "It's okay," she murmured against his chest, wanting to believe. At dinner they talked about future plans, about names for the baby on the way, about renovating the children's room. For a few hours Felicity managed to forget the tension, managed to convince herself that she was imagining things, that every relationship had its ups and downs. But the next morning, reality returned. Raphael found her phone on the living room table and without asking started going through it. "Who's this Luke who messaged you yesterday?" Luke was a college colleague, married, father of two, someone who occasionally sent messages in an alumni group chat. "He's just a colleague, Raphael, from the university group." "Why is he sending you a private message then?" "It's not a private message. It's in the group. But he specifically mentioned your name." Felicity felt frustration rise. It was always like this. Any interaction, any message, any contact with the outside world was dissected, questioned, turned into something suspicious. "Raphael, you're making a mountain out of a molehill." He looked at her with that expression she had learned to fear, a mixture of hurt and contained anger. "I'm just trying to protect you, Felicity. You're too innocent. You don't notice when guys are hitting on you." "No one's hitting on me. And even if they were, I can take care of myself." "Can you? Because I don't see you doing it." The argument ended with him slamming the door, leaving her alone with Michael and a knot in her stomach. She spent the day trying to distract herself, caring for the baby, cleaning the house that was already clean, preparing a dinner that Raphael barely touched when he returned. In the following days, the pattern repeated. Moments of tenderness interspersed with episodes of control, subtle criticisms that made her doubt herself, gradual isolation from friends and family. Raphael began to control their finances more closely, saying it was to better organize expenses with 2 children. He wanted to know where she spent every penny, questioned every purchase, even the most basic ones. Felicity called her father, Anthony, a 58-year-old man who had worked his whole life as a civil servant and was now retired. He lived in Bristol with his youngest son, Henry, who was 27 and worked as a nursing technician after years serving as a volunteer paramedic. "Dad, is everything all right there?" "All great, honey, and you all? How's my grandson?" They talked about trivialities, and Felicity almost told him about the difficulties with Raphael, but something stopped her. Shame, perhaps, or fear that her father would confirm what she still didn't want to admit, that she had made the wrong choice, that she had been mistaken about who Raphael really was. "We were thinking of coming to see you," Anthony said. "It's been a while since I've seen Michael, and Henry is eager to get to know your apartment better." "That would be great, Dad." And that's how it was agreed. Unbeknownst to Felicity at the time, that visit would change everything, break the cycle she had grown accustomed to accepting, bring to light truths she had buried deep within herself. The days leading up to the Saturday scheduled for Anthony and Henry's visit were like walking in quicksand. Every step Felicity took seemed to sink her a little deeper into a reality she didn't recognize as her own. Raphael was particularly irritable, and she couldn't quite understand why. Or perhaps she knew, but didn't want to admit. On Tuesday, he came home in the middle of the afternoon, which was unusual. Felicity was breastfeeding Michael in the living room when she heard the key in the door. Her body tensed automatically. "What are you doing home this hour?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Can't I come to my own house?" he replied, throwing the keys on the coffee table with more force than necessary. "Sorry, that's not what I meant." Raphael went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, closed it again. He returned to the living room and stood still, looking at her, at Michael, at the room as if searching for something wrong. "Did you go out today?" "No," Felicity replied. "Michael was a bit fussy, so we stayed home." "And you don't think you should take him to the doctor?" "He just has a bit of colic, Raphael. No need to go to the doctor for every little thing." "Oh, now you're a doctor too." Felicity took a deep breath, suppressing her irritation. Michael had stopped feeding and was looking at them with those big, curious eyes that seemed to understand more than they should. "Are you okay?" she asked, changing the subject. "Did something happen at work?" "Why would something happen?" "You seem nervous." Raphael ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she knew well. It meant he was struggling to keep calm, that something was bothering him deeply. "I just think you could try harder, Felicity." "Try harder at what?" "Everything. Taking care of the house, Michael. Yourself. Look how you're dressed." Felicity looked down. She was wearing sweatpants and a loose t-shirt, comfortable clothes for taking care of a baby, for a pregnant woman who spent all day at home. "What's wrong with my clothes? You don't dress up anymore, you don't take care of yourself. It looks like you've given up on yourself." The words hurt more than she expected. Felicity felt her eyes sting, but forced the tears back. She had learned that crying in front of Raphael only made things worse. He would say she was dramatic, too emotional, that she was using her pregnancy as an excuse. "I'm taking care of a 3-month-old baby, Raphael. I don't have time to get dressed up like I'm going to a party." He laughed, a humorless sound. "It's always an excuse, isn't it? There's always a justification for everything." Raphael left the apartment again, without explaining where he was going. Felicity stayed there, Michael in her arms, feeling an emptiness in her chest that seemed to grow every day. She remembered being in university, full of dreams and plans, when she thought meeting the right man would solve her life, complete something that was missing. Now she realized she had lost pieces of herself in the process, that she had traded her independence for an illusion of security. On Wednesday, Felicity had a prenatal appointment. Raphael insisted on accompanying her this time, which left her surprised and slightly hopeful. Maybe he was trying to improve. Maybe he had realized he was being too hard on her. But during the appointment, he kept asking the doctor questions that weren't exactly about Felicity's health, but rather about her behavior. "Doctor, Is it normal for a pregnant woman to be so emotional? Felicity cries at everything lately. Dr. Patricia looked at Felicity before answering, as if assessing the situation. Hormonal changes can affect mood, yes, but it's important for the pregnant woman to have a peaceful environment and adequate emotional support. I give her all the support, Raphael said, with that convincing way he knew how to use so well. But sometimes it seems like nothing I do is enough. Felicity remained silent, feeling her cheeks flush with embarrassment. It was as if he was describing a version of her that didn't correspond to reality, but at the same time he did it in such a skillful way that even she began to doubt herself. After the appointment, in the car, Raphael was silent. Felicity looked out the window, watching Manchester pass by, the streets she had known since she was young, the city that once seemed full of possibilities, and now seemed like a beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. "You embarrassed me in there," Raphael said suddenly. "What do you mean?" "By staying silent like that, looking like a poor thing. The doctor must have thought I was a monster." Felicity didn't know what to say. If she defended herself, she would be accused of being dramatic. If she stayed silent, she would be accused of being passive. There was no right answer. That night, Raphael checked her phone without asking permission. He did this more and more frequently, and Felicity had stopped reacting. It was easier to let him look than to deal with the explosion of jealousy and accusations that would come if she complained. "You have messages from Julia," he said, as if accusing her of wrongdoing. "She sent me some photos from her cousin's wedding." Raphael scrolled through the messages, reading them one by one. Felicity felt a silent rage grow within her but said nothing. "She's still inviting you to lunch." "I know. And are you going?" Felicity took a deep breath. "No, I'm not." Raphael returned the phone, satisfied. "Good. You need to focus on what matters now. Your family is here, with me and Michael. But Julia has been my friend for years. And what has she done for you lately? I'm here every day, Felicity. I pay the bills. I give you a roof over your head. Your friends will disappear when you really need them." The words echoed in her head for hours. Felicity wondered if he was right, if she was being ungrateful, if she was focusing on the wrong things. The manipulation was so subtle, so well constructed, that she herself began to believe Raphael's version of reality. On Thursday, she gathered the courage to call Julia and arrange the lunch they had discussed. But as she was about to dial, Raphael appeared behind her. "Who are you calling?" "No one," she replied quickly, putting her phone away. He didn't insist, but his look said he knew, and Felicity felt another piece of herself drift away, another small freedom being cut. On Friday, the eve of her father and brother's visit, Raphael was particularly tense. He complained about dinner, said the house was disorganized, criticized the way she had folded Michael's clothes. Each word was a small barb, but the accumulation of them formed a deep wound. "Ah, you sure they need to come tomorrow?" he asked for the third time that day. "Raphael, we've talked about this. It's my dad and my brother. I know who they are. I just think you could have considered that I'm tired, that I work all week. They won't stay long. They just want to see Michael." He scoffed, irritated, and went to the bedroom. Felicity stayed in the living room, holding Michael, her heart heavy. She missed her father, her brother, the feeling of being loved unconditionally, without constant criticism, without having to measure every word, every gesture. Later, when she went to the bedroom, Raphael was lying on his back, facing away from her. Felicity lay on the other side of the bed, keeping her distance. They slept further and further apart, in every sense. In the middle of the night, Michael woke up crying. Felicity quickly got up, but Raphael grumbled something about her not even being able to get the baby to sleep properly. She picked Michael up, taking him to the living room so as not to bother him further, and sat there in the armchair rocking her son, looking out the window at the city. Lights. Tomorrow her father and Henry would come. And Felicity had the strange feeling that something was about to change, that this visit would be different from all the others, that finally someone would see what she had been hiding so well, even from herself. Saturday dawned grey in Manchester, with heavy clouds threatening rain. Felicity woke early, despite having slept poorly. Michael was quiet in his crib, still asleep, and Raphael had already left. A note on the kitchen table simply said he had gone to sort some things out and would be back in the afternoon. Felicity took advantage of the peaceful morning to tidy the apartment. She mopped all the rooms, organized Michael's toys, prepared some snacks to offer her father and brother. As she worked, she felt a mixture of anxiety and relief. Anxiety about the meeting, about Raphael's reaction, about what might happen. Relief at finally having her family's presence, at not being completely alone, even if only for a few hours. Around 3 in the afternoon, Raphael arrived. By the way he closed the door, Felicity immediately knew the day wouldn't be easy. He was carrying that heavy energy, that contained storm she had learned to recognize. "How was it?" she asked carefully. It was. He went straight to the bedroom, changed his clothes, and returned to the living room. Michael was awake, playing with a musical mobile that played a soft melody. Raphael looked at the baby, at Felicity, and then at the clock. "What time did they say they'd arrive?" "My dad said around 6. Still 3 hours." Raphael grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat on the sofa. Felicity realized he had already been drinking before coming home. Her heart tightened. When he drank, he became even more unpredictable. The barriers that usually kept his behavior under a veneer of civility became more fragile. The next few hours were tense. Felicity tried to keep the conversation going, tried to create a light atmosphere, but every word seemed to fall into a void. Raphael responded in monosyllables, looked at her with that expression that mixed contempt with something darker. When the clock struck 5:30, Michael began to get agitated. Felicity picked him up, trying to calm him, but the baby was especially restless. Perhaps he sensed the tension in the air, perhaps he was just tired. She tried to breastfeed him, but he refused. She tried to rock him, but he cried louder. "This kid never stops," Raphael grumbled, turning up the television volume. "He's tired," Felicity explained, her voice trembling slightly. "And I'm not?" "Sorry." "Stop apologizing for everything, Felicity. It irritates me." She fell silent, continuing to rock Michael, but the baby cried louder and louder. The minutes passed slowly, heavily, and the tension in the room was almost palpable. Suddenly, Raphael stood up and walked towards her. "Give him to me." "It's okay, I can calm him down." I said, "Give me the baby." There was something in his voice, something that made all the alarms inside Felicity go off. "Raphael, just let me—" "Now, Felicity." She instinctively recoiled, shielding Michael with her body, and it was that movement, that silent refusal, that made something inside Raphael completely snap. "You think I'm going to hurt my own son?" he yelled. "Is that it? You think I'm a monster?" "No, that's not it. It's just that he's scared and—" Raphael lunged forward, trying to snatch Michael from her arms. Felicity moved away and he followed her. The room seemed to shrink, the entire apartment seemed to shrink, until there was nowhere left to go. "Give me that baby now." The words were shouts and Michael cried desperately, and Felicity felt her heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode. She turned her body, protecting her son, and it was then she felt it. The pain was instant, devastating. The kick hit her right leg with brutal force, and she felt the bone give way, heard the dry sound of the fracture even before registering what had happened. Felicity fell, but even as she fell, even in complete shock, her arms wrapped around Michael, protecting him from the fall, turning her body so that she hit the floor, not him. The pain was unbearable, radiating from her leg in waves that stole all the air from her lungs. Michael screamed, and she wanted to scream too, but she couldn't make a sound beyond a strangled moan. Michael's musical toy, a small bear that sat next to the armchair, had been hit in the fall and activated its mechanism, beginning to play the lullaby. But Felicity didn't know that toy had a special function, a function Raphael had mocked when she bought it, saying it was a waste of money. The bear had a recording mode that activated with sudden movement, a safety feature for parents to monitor the baby. And now it was recording everything. Felicity tried to crawl, tried to get away, but the pain was paralyzing. Michael was still in her arms, crying, and she held her son tightly, whispering meaningless words, trying to calm him even as her own world was crumbling. Raphael stood still, looking at her. There was no guilt in his eyes, no regret, only irritation. "Stop dramatizing," he said. "You forced this. You wouldn't give me the baby." "Help me," Felicity whispered, her voice hoarse with pain. "Please, Raphael, help me." He didn't move. He just stood there, looking at her as if she were an inconvenience, a problem he didn't know how to solve. "You always exaggerate everything." "My leg," Felicity managed to say. "It's broken." "It's not broken. You just fell." But it was. Felicity could feel it, could see the strange angle, the way she couldn't move without the pain becoming unbearable. And Raphael remained there, impassive as if she were inventing everything. It was at that moment that the front door opened. Felicity heard voices, footsteps, and then saw her father, Anthony, enter the living room, followed by Henry. The world seemed to stop for a second. Anthony was 58 with greying hair, his face marked by a life of honest work. Henry was by his side, taller, 27, with the strong build of someone accustomed to emergency situations. The two men stopped, processing the scene. Felicity on the floor, holding a crying Michael, her leg at a strange angle, tears streaming down her face. Raphael standing motionless in the middle of the room. What happened here? Anthony's voice was low, dangerously calm. Henry was already moving, kneeling beside Felicity. His years as a volunteer paramedic had trained his body to respond even before his brain fully processed the situation. "Nanda, let me see," he said softly, his hands already carefully assessing her leg with professional care. "She fell," Raphael said quickly. "The baby was crying and she tripped." Felicity looked at her father. Anthony was looking directly at her, not at Raphael. And in that look, she saw everything. The understanding, the pain, the contained anger. He knew. Without her saying a word, he knew. "This isn't from a simple fall," Henry said, his voice technical but with an underlying tension. "This is a serious fracture, and recent, very recent." Raphael began to speak, to invent a story, but Anthony raised his hand, silencing him. "We're calling the police," he said, pulling out his phone. "No need," Raphael began, his voice having lost all its previous authority. "It was an accident. She fell." "My brother was a paramedic for 10 years, Henry said, still examining Felicity. "I know the difference between a fall and an assault." Michael's musical toy continued to play its lullaby, a grotesque contrast to the horror of the situation. And, within it, the recording continued, capturing every word, every sound, every piece of truth that finally came to light. The minutes that followed seemed to happen in slow motion and accelerated speed at the same time. Henry worked quickly, taking off his jacket and folding it to serve as an improvised support for Felicity's leg. His hands were firm, professional, but she could see the contained anger in his eyes, in the way his jaw was clenched. "Nanda, I need you to stay calm, okay?" he said softly. "I know it hurts a lot, but you need to breathe slowly. For the baby." Michael was still in her arms, the baby's sobs gradually subsiding now that he felt the presence of more people, a change in the room's energy. Anthony carefully took his grandson, moving to the other side of the room, keeping his eyes on Raphael. "Don't move," Anthony said to Raphael, his voice low but charged with an authority that made the younger man freeze. "Anthony, I can explain," Raphael began, but his voice sounded hollow even to himself. "You won't explain anything. You'll stay exactly where you are until the police arrive." Raphael looked at the door, as if considering leaving, but Henry looked up from the work he was doing with Felicity. "I wouldn't try it," he said simply. The tension in his voice made it clear he was very close to losing the professional control he maintained. The ambulance siren could be heard in the distance, growing louder with each second. Henry had called as soon as he assessed the severity of Felicity's fracture. He knew she needed immediate medical attention, that this injury was not something that could wait. While they waited, Henry noticed Michael's musical toy still playing its melody. He seemed to register something, picking up the little bear and turning it in his hands. His eyes widened slightly when he saw the small red light flashing on the back. "Dad, this toy is recording." Anthony looked at the bear, then at Raphael, who had visibly paled. Henry pressed a few buttons and a voice came out of the toy's small speaker. It was Raphael's voice, shouting, "Give me that baby now!" And then sounds of a struggle, Michael's crying, Felicity's muffled scream, the impact of the fall. "Turn that off," Raphael said, taking a step forward. Anthony moved, placing himself between Raphael and Henry. "You won't touch anything else." Henry saved the recording to the app connected to the toy, sending a copy to his own phone. That small piece of technology Raphael had mocked, that he had called a waste, now became irrefutable proof of what had happened. The paramedics arrived first, an efficient team that quickly took over Felicity's care. Henry professionally relayed the information, speaking in medical terms that the team understood immediately. Open fracture of the tibia and fibula, elevated blood pressure, 5-month pregnant woman, trauma mechanism consistent with direct assault. Raphael tried to approach the stretcher, where they were placing Felicity, but one of the paramedics blocked him. "Sir, I need you to stay back. She's my partner. I need to go with her." At that moment, 2 police officers entered the apartment. A woman around 40, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, and a younger man, both with serious expressions as they assessed the scene. "Sergeant Olivia," the officer said, showing her identification. "What happened here?" Anthony quickly explained, his voice remaining surprisingly firm as he recounted how they had arrived and found his daughter on the floor. Henry showed the toy's recording. Raphael tried to speak, tried to say it had been an accident, that Felicity had tripped, that everything was being distorted. But Sergeant Olivia listened to the recording carefully. She heard the escalation of violence in Raphael's voice, the fear in Felicity's voice, the unmistakable sound of an assault. "Sir," she said to Raphael, "I'll need you to come with us to give a statement. I didn't do anything wrong. It was an accident. The recording doesn't indicate that. That toy is faulty, anything could have been recorded. But Sergeant Olivia had seen many cases like this. She recognized the signs, the way Raphael tried to manipulate the narrative, how he tried to play the victim. Sir, you'll come with us now voluntarily to give a statement, or I can take you into custody for assault. The choice is yours." Raphael looked around, searching for some kind of ally, someone who would believe his version, but he found only hard, accusatory stares. Felicity was being placed on the stretcher, groaning in pain, Michael in his grandfather's arms, and the 2 men who had entered that apartment as visitors were now there as protectors, as witnesses, as the barrier that finally prevented him from continuing his behavior. "All right," Raphael said finally, raising his hands in a gesture of false surrender. "I'll go, but this is a big misunderstanding." As Raphael was led away by the police, Felicity was placed in the ambulance. Anthony and Henry went with her, Anthony holding Michael, Henry holding his sister's hand. "It's going to be okay now, Nanda," he whispered. "You're safe." Felicity wanted to believe it. She wanted to feel that she really was safe, but the pain was so intense, physical and emotional, that she could barely process what was happening. Part of her still couldn't believe she had reached this point, that her relationship, which once seemed so promising, had become this. Explicit violence, broken bones, police. At the hospital, the medical team worked quickly. Dr. Patricia was on call that night, and when she saw Felicity being brought in, her face showed a mixture of concern and something that looked like sadness, as if she had expected something like this might happen, but wished she was wrong. "Felicity, what happened?" she asked, already examining the fractured leg. Felicity tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. It was Henry who explained, showing professionalism even while talking about his own sister. Dr. Patricia nodded gravely. "We'll need to perform surgery to fix the fracture, and we'll monitor the baby carefully. How many weeks are you?" 22, Felicity managed to say. "All right, we'll take care of you and your baby." In the hours that followed, Felicity underwent examinations, x-rays, and was prepared for surgery. The entire time, Anthony stayed with Michael, rocking his grandson, talking softly to him, saying that everything would be all right, that Mommy would be okay. Henry accompanied Felicity to the operating room, holding her hand until the last moment. "You're strong, Nanda. You always have been, and now you're not alone. We're here. We'll always be here." When Felicity woke up from surgery hours later, it was dawn. The pain was controlled by medication, and her leg was immobilized with plates and screws. But the baby was fine. Its heartbeats were strong, regular. Anthony was sleeping in a chair beside the bed, Michael in an improvised crib the hospital had provided. Henry was awake, looking at his phone. When he saw she had woken up, he smiled slightly. "Hi, sis, how are you feeling?" "Tired, confused, scared, relieved. So many things." "Raphael was detained," Henry said softly. "The recording was enough. They're going to formally prosecute him, and we've already filed the papers for a protective order. He won't be able to approach you." Felicity closed her eyes, letting the tears flow silently. They were tears of pain, of relief, of mourning for something she thought she had but never truly did. For the first time in months, even lying in a hospital bed with a broken leg and an uncertain future, Felicity felt something she had forgotten. She felt she could breathe. The days in the hospital turned into a strange journey of recovery and discovery. Felicity underwent several surgeries to fully repair the fracture, and throughout that time, Anthony and Henry took turns by her side, caring for Michael, ensuring she never felt alone. On Monday, 2 days after the incident, Julia appeared at the hospital. Felicity saw her enter the room with red eyes, as if she had spent the entire night crying. "Fell, I heard," Julia said, sitting beside the bed and taking her friend's hand. "I didn't know it was so serious. I realized something was wrong, but I didn't know." Felicity squeezed her hand. "How did you know?" "Your dad called me, but I already knew something wasn't right for months. The way you cancelled our meetings, how you always seemed nervous when I called, how you stopped sharing things with me." "I was ashamed," Felicity admitted, tears starting to flow. "I thought it was my fault, that I was exaggerating, that if I told someone, no one would believe me." "I would always believe you. Always." The two remained silent for a moment, just holding each other's hands, and Felicity felt another piece of herself being restored, another connection that had been severed being reconnected. That same day, Sergeant Olivia came to the hospital to get Felicity's formal statement. With her was an attorney from Legal Aid, specializing in domestic violence cases, Dr. Beatrice Stone, a 50-year-old woman with a firm but kind gaze. "Felicity," Dr. Stone said, "I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning." And Felicity told. She told about how Raphael was at first, charming and attentive. She told about the subtle criticisms that grew, about the financial control, about the gradual isolation, about how she had lost contact with friends and family, about how her every decision was questioned, monitored, criticized. Sergeant Olivia took notes, and on her face, Felicity saw something that surprised her. It wasn't pity. It was understanding, recognition, as if she had seen this story many times before. "You are not alone in this," the sergeant said. "What happened to you happens to thousands of women. And now, with the recording and the testimonies we are collecting, we have a solid case." "Testimonies?" Felicity asked. "Your neighbors. 3 of them have already come to the station after seeing the commotion on Saturday. A neighbor from the apartment next door said she heard frequent arguments, that she thought about calling someone several times but wasn't sure. Another neighbor said he saw you a few times with deep, dark circles under your eyes, always looking scared." Felicity felt a mixture of validation and sadness. Validation because her experience was being recognized, seen, believed. Sadness because she realized how much she had normalized, how much she had hidden even from herself. Dr. Stone explained the next steps. A protective order was already in effect. Raphael would not be able to approach Felicity, Michael, the hospital, or any place she frequented. There was also the process for Michael's custody and the baby on the way, in addition to the legal proceedings against Raphael for the assaults. "Did he try to claim it was an accident?" Felicity asked, though she already knew the answer. "He tried," Sergeant Olivia confirmed, "but the recording is clear, and so is the medical report. Henry was right. That type of fracture doesn't happen in a simple fall. It was caused by direct and intentional impact." In the following days, Felicity had sessions with a hospital psychologist, Dr. Camilla Reynolds, specialized in trauma and domestic violence. At first, Felicity had difficulty speaking, processing everything that had happened. "It's normal to feel confused," Dr. Reynolds said. "It's even normal to feel guilt or longing for what you thought you had. Abusive relationships are complex. They're not violence all the time. If they were, it would be easier to leave. The difficult part is that there are good moments interspersed, and it's to these good moments that the victim clings, hoping that that is the real version of the person." Felicity nodded, recognizing the truth in those words. She remembered the times Raphael was sweet, when he brought flowers when he said he loved her. And she remembered how she used those moments to justify the bad ones, to convince herself that things would get better. On Wednesday, she received an unexpected visit. It was Dr. Patricia, who had been following her pregnancy from the beginning. "Felicity, I need to apologize to you," she said, sitting beside the bed. "Why?" "I suspected. In the last few appointments I saw signs. You always seemed tense, nervous. And when he came along to that appointment and kept asking those questions, trying to control the narrative about you, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't do enough. I should have asked more directly. I should have created a moment to speak to you alone." Felicity took the doctor's hand. "It wasn't your fault. I didn't even admit it myself. How could you help someone who doesn't admit they need help? Still, from now on we'll do things differently. I'll make sure you have all the support you need, medical and psychological." During her hospitalization, Anthony and Henry brought clean clothes from the apartment, but only after ensuring Raphael wasn't there. Sergeant Olivia accompanied them, and it was she who noticed other details Felicity had normalized. A tracking app installed on her phone without her knowledge, small cameras disguised in some rooms, a notebook where Raphael noted her schedule, who she talked to, where she went. "He was completely monitoring you," Henry said, showing the photos the police had taken as evidence. "Nanda, this wasn't a relationship. This was a prison." Seeing all that exposed, photographed, documented, made something inside Felicity finally break. She cried, a deep catharsis of months of accumulated tension, denial, fear. And her father and brother stayed there, letting her cry, offering presence, not empty words, of comfort. By the end of the week, Dr. Stone returned with important news. Raphael had tried to file a motion alleging that Felicity was trying to alienate Michael from him, that it was all a setup, that the recording had been manipulated. But the judge who reviewed the case, Judge Mark Fisher, was known for taking domestic violence cases seriously. He denied all of Raphael's motions, Dr. Stone said. And furthermore, based on the evidence, he determined that Raphael must undergo psychological evaluation and is prohibited from having any contact with you or the children until the case is fully judged. Felicity felt a deep relief. For the first time, the system she always thought wouldn't believe her, that would question her story, was on her side. Michael was adapting well. Anthony was a devoted grandfather, and the baby seemed to feel safe in his arms. Felicity, even with limited mobility, could breastfeed, could care for her son, could begin to imagine a future where she and her children would be safe. One afternoon, looking out the hospital window at Manchester under the sun, Felicity noticed something. The calm outside, the city going about its normal rhythm, matched something. That was beginning to settle within her. It wasn't yet complete peace, it wasn't an absence of pain or fear, but it was the beginning of something. It was the possibility of breathing without measuring each breath, of speaking without calculating each word, of existing without asking permission. 3 weeks after the incident that changed her life, Felicity was discharged from the hospital. Her leg was still immobilized, and she would need months of physiotherapy, but the baby she carried was healthy, strong, resisting everything that had happened, just as she was trying to resist. Anthony had made a decision. Felicity and Michael would go to Bristol with him, stay at his house until she was fully recovered, until she felt ready to decide what to do next. Henry had already prepared one of the rooms, transforming it into a cozy space for his sister and nephew. Returning to her childhood home was emotional. Felicity hadn't lived there for years, not since she had left to study education in Manchester, not since she had met Raphael and thought she would build her own family, her own home. Now she returned wounded but not broken. She returned different from the person who had left, but perhaps in a way more whole. In the first few days she simply rested. Anthony cared for Michael with the dedication of someone who had raised 2 children alone after his wife passed away years ago. He knew about fresh starts, about rebuilding life after devastating losses, and he passed that wisdom on to his daughter, not in words, but in presence, in small gestures of care. Henry returned to work at the local hospital, but spent every evening at home, dining with the family, talking, making Felicity laugh with stories from his shifts. It was therapeutic, that return to simplicity, to the feeling of belonging without conditions. Julia visited whenever she could, making the trip from Manchester to Bristol on weekends. She brought news from the outside world, but also simply offered companionship, long conversations on the porch of the house while Michael slept. During one of these conversations, Felicity finally managed to articulate something she had been processing. "I wonder how I let it happen," she said, looking at the horizon where the sun set over the mountains around Bristol. Julia shook her head. "You didn't let it happen, Fel. It was done to you. There's a huge difference. But I'm intelligent. I studied, I have a profession. I always considered myself a strong person. And you are. But abuse doesn't choose victims by intelligence or strength. It uses those very characteristics against the person. It made you believe that if you were truly intelligent, you would have noticed sooner, that if you were truly strong, you would have left sooner. But the truth is, you were trapped in a system that was carefully built around you." Felicity let the tears fall, but this time they were different tears, not of shame or guilt, but of understanding, of acceptance. A month after leaving the hospital, Dr. Stone came to visit her with important news. She asked them to sit in the living room, and Felicity noticed from the lawyer's face that what she had to say was significant. "Felicity, we investigated Raphael's past more deeply as part of the legal process, and we discovered something important." Felicity felt her heart race. "What?" "He had 2 previous relationships before you, and in both there were reports of controlling behavior. One of the women even filed a police report but ended up withdrawing it after he convinced her he had changed, that he would seek help. The other simply disappeared, moved cities, never wanted to talk about what happened." Felicity felt nauseous. Everything she had experienced, all the manipulations, the controls, the psychological violence he had done before. And she wasn't the first. She was just the next. "Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't I know about this?" He was careful. He moved cities after each relationship. He presented himself as someone new, without a past. And the women he hurt, like many victims of abuse, were ashamed to speak, afraid of not being believed. You broke that cycle, Felicity. By reporting, by not withdrawing the complaint, by fighting for justice, you not only saved yourself, but possibly saved other women who could have been next. Those words echoed in Felicity's mind for days. She wasn't weak for falling in love with Raphael. She wasn't foolish for not seeing the signs immediately. She was human. And now, she was a survivor. The legal process moved forward. Raphael tried various appeals, hired lawyers who tried to discredit Felicity, who tried to paint the recording as insufficient evidence, who tried to claim he was the true victim of a setup. But Dr. Stone was relentless. She presented not only the recording, but the testimonies of the neighbors, the detailed medical report, the evidence of surveillance and control found in the apartment, and the records of previous relationships. The judge had no doubts. Raphael was sentenced to serve time in closed custody, lost custody of Michael and rights to the baby on the way, and was ordered to pay child support and compensation to Felicity for the physical and psychological damages caused. When Felicity received the news of the sentence, she didn't feel joy exactly. She felt relief. She felt that finally that chapter could be closed, that she could begin to write new chapters where she was the author, not just a character in someone else's story. Months passed. Felicity's leg healed slowly, leaving a scar she decided not to hide, but also not to let define who she was. She began regular therapy, processing the trauma, rebuilding her self-esteem, relearning to trust her own judgment. When her daughter was born, on a clear September morning, Felicity held little Helena in her arms and knew that everything she had been through was worth it. Not because suffering had some noble purpose, but because she had survived it, and now had two beautiful children who would grow up seeing their mother as an example of strength and reconstruction. Anthony cried upon meeting his granddaughter, holding the little one with the same tenderness with which he had held Felicity and Henry decades ago. Michael, now almost a year old, looked curiously at his baby sister, and Felicity knew she would build for them the home she always wanted, based on real love, not on control disguised as care. She decided not to return to Manchester immediately. Bristol had become her refuge, and she found a job as an educational coordinator at a local school. She was rebuilding her professional life, her friendships, her independence. One afternoon, almost a year after that terrible Saturday that changed everything, Felicity was on her father's porch, watching Michael play in the yard, Helena sleeping peacefully in her arms. Henry sat beside her. "How are you, sis?" he asked. Felicity thought about the question. She thought about everything she had lived, everything she had lost, everything she had gained. "I'm whole," she replied. "For the first time in a long time, I'm whole." And it was true. The scars were there, physical and emotional, but they didn't define her. She was more than what Raphael had tried to make her. She was Felicity, mother, daughter, sister, professional, survivor, free woman. The sun set over Bristol, painting the sky with oranges and pinks, and Felicity felt that the beauty outside finally matched the peace settling within her. She knew the road would still be long, that there would be difficult days, memories that would haunt her, fears she would need to face. But she also knew she would never be alone again. She had her father, her brother, her children, her friends, an entire network of people who loved her truly, unconditionally, without control, without violence. And she knew, most importantly of all, that she had herself. Her voice, her strength, her capacity to start anew. A night of terror had transformed into a turning point. A cycle was broken. The truth, once silenced, had gained form, sound, and consequence. And the woman who once feared her own shadow now walked in the light, free, whole, reborn. Dear listeners, we hope Felicity's story has touched your hearts and opened your eyes to a reality that thousands of women silently face. This narrative reminds us that strength is not in never falling, but in having the courage to rise and seek help. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore the complexity of life, the power of resilience, and the beauty of new beginnings. Find our special playlist here. If this story touched you in any way, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit and illuminate important issues in our society. Your subscription helps us continue telling these stories that need to be heard. And you, do you have any reflections on Felicity's story? Do you know someone who went through something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments below, always with respect and empathy. Together we can create a community of support and awareness. We look forward to seeing you in our next content. See you soon.